Marcus Williams stood in front of his small bathroom mirror and smiled at his reflection. The 28-year-old Marine had just finished shaving and his dark skin looked smooth and clean. He ran his hand over his short military haircut one more time before walking to his closet. Today was special. Today he would finally meet Sarah's family. He pulled out his best white dress shirt from the closet. It was the one his mother had bought him before his first deployment to Afghanistan. She said every man needed one perfect shirt for important occasions. Marcus had worn it to award ceremonies and formal military events, but today felt different. Today felt more important than any medal ceremony. The shirt fit perfectly across his broad shoulders. 3 tours as a Marine sniper had built his body into a weapon of precision and strength. His hands were steady and his eyes were sharp. These same hands that could hit a target from over a mile away now fumbled slightly with the buttons. He was nervous, and that surprised him. He had faced enemy fire without flinching, but the thought of meeting Sarah's parents made his heart race. Marcus walked to his kitchen and made coffee in the small machine Sarah had given him for his birthday. The apartment was tiny but clean. Everything had its place, just like in the military. His bed was made with hospital corners. His boots were lined up perfectly by the door. His uniforms hung in order of importance. This was how Marines lived even when they were alone. He checked his watch. It was only 8 in the morning, but Marcus always woke up early. The military had trained his body to function on little sleep and wake up ready for action. Today he had nowhere to be until noon, but he could not sleep in. His body would not let him. The coffee tasted good and strong. Marcus sat at his small table and looked out the window at the California morning. The sun was already bright and warm. It would be a beautiful day, perfect for meeting the family of the woman he loved. Sarah had been asking him to meet her parents for months. At first Marcus had made excuses. He was deployed. He was training. He was busy with military duties. The truth was he was scared. Sarah came from a different world than he did. Her father was a doctor and her mother was a teacher. They lived in a big house in the suburbs with a perfect lawn and expensive cars. Marcus had grown up in Detroit in a neighborhood where gunshots were more common than garden parties. His mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. His father had left when Marcus was 10 years old. The military had saved him from a life that could have gone very wrong. It gave him purpose and discipline and pride. But Sarah saw something in him that even Marcus did not always see. She saw past the tough Marine exterior to the gentle man underneath. She saw how he helped elderly neighbors with their groceries. She saw how he sent half his paycheck home to his mother every month. She saw how he read books about history and philosophy in his spare time. Marcus finished his coffee and grabbed his keys. He had planned the perfect day. First, he would buy flowers for Sarah's mother. Then he would get good coffee from the shop where he and Sarah had their first date. After that, he would drive to the shopping center where they planned to meet. Sarah would take him to her family home from there. He locked his apartment door and walked down the stairs to the parking lot. His car was old but reliable. He kept it clean and maintained just like everything else in his life. As he drove toward town, Marcus felt his nerves settling. He had faced much scarier things than meeting parents. He was a United States Marine. He could handle anything. The flower shop was just opening when Marcus arrived. The elderly woman behind the counter smiled when she saw him in his dress shirt and neat appearance. She helped him pick out a beautiful bouquet of yellow roses mixed with white lilies. Sarah had mentioned that her mother loved yellow flowers. Marcus paid for the flowers and walked back to his car. The morning was getting warmer, and he could feel the excitement building in his chest. In a few hours, he would be sitting at Sarah's family dinner table. He would be part of something normal and peaceful and good. After years of war and violence and death, this felt like the greatest victory of all. He drove slowly toward the coffee shop, taking his time to enjoy the perfect morning. Marcus had no way of knowing that in less than 2 hours his perfect day would turn into a nightmare that would reach the highest levels of military command. He had no idea that the color of his skin and his careful way of moving would make him a target. All he knew was that he was happy and in love, and ready to take the next step in building a normal life. Detective Ray Morrison sat in his patrol car drinking cold coffee from a paper cup. The coffee tasted terrible, but he needed the caffeine. He had been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight, and the stress was eating at him like acid in his stomach. 3 armed robberies in the past month had put the entire police department on high alert. His captain was breathing down his neck for results. The robberies all happened in the same area. The shopping district where families came to spend their weekends, where people felt safe walking around with their wallets and purses. Now that safety was gone, and the community was angry. They wanted answers. They wanted arrests. They wanted someone to blame. Morrison rubbed his tired eyes and looked around the parking lot. It was almost 10 in the morning, and the shoppers were starting to arrive. Young mothers with strollers, elderly couples walking slowly hand in hand, teenagers laughing and talking loudly, normal people living normal lives. Then he saw him, a young black man walking alone through the shopping center. He was tall and muscular with the kind of build that came from serious physical training. His movements were careful and controlled. He walked slowly, looking around at the stores and checking his phone. Something about the way he moved made Morrison sit up straighter in his seat. The description from the robbery witnesses was vague. A young black male between 20 and 30 years old, athletic build, around 6 feet tall. That description could fit thousands of people, but Morrison felt his instincts kicking in. After 15 years as a cop, he had learned to trust his gut feelings about suspicious behavior. Morrison watched as the man stopped in front of an electronics store. He stood there for a long moment, looking through the window. Then he pulled out his phone and checked it again. To Morrison, this looked like surveillance, like someone casing a target before making a move. The detective reached for his radio. His heart was starting to beat faster. This could be it. This could be the break they needed in the robbery cases. His captain would be thrilled if Morrison could close these cases. Maybe he would finally get the promotion he had been waiting for. Morrison called for backup using the code numbers that meant possible suspect in sight. He kept his voice calm and professional, but inside he was excited. 2 patrol cars responded immediately. They would be there in less than 5 minutes. The suspect was still walking around the shopping center. He had moved from the electronics store to a clothing shop. He seemed to be killing time waiting for something or someone. Morrison had seen this behavior before from criminals who were waiting for the right moment to strike. Morrison got out of his car and started following the suspect on foot. He stayed far enough back to avoid being noticed, but close enough to act if the man tried to run. The backup units would be arriving soon, and then they could make their move safely. The man with the flowers in his hand had no idea he was being watched. He looked relaxed and happy. He was probably congratulating himself on not getting caught for the previous robberies. Morrison had seen that confidence before in criminals who thought they were smarter than the police. Morrison spoke into his radio again. The backup units were in position. 1 car was parked at the north exit. Another car was at the south exit. If the suspect tried to run, they had him trapped. It was time to make contact. Morrison straightened his uniform and checked his weapon. His gun was secure in its holster but ready if needed. After 15 years on the force, he knew that routine stops could turn dangerous in seconds. He would be polite but firm, professional but ready for anything. The detective started walking toward the suspect, who was now standing near a coffee shop. The man was still holding flowers and checking his phone. He looked innocent enough, but Morrison knew that appearances could be deceiving. Some of the most dangerous criminals he had arrested looked like choir boys on the surface. Morrison took a deep breath and prepared to approach. This was the moment that would either solve 3 major crimes or turn into another dead end. His career and reputation were riding on his instincts being correct. The backup officers were watching and waiting for his signal. The suspect turned slightly, and Morrison got a better look at his face. He was young and clean-cut with intelligent eyes. But Morrison had learned not to judge criminals by their appearance. Smart criminals often looked exactly like regular citizens. That was what made them so dangerous. Morrison stepped forward, ready to change the course of both men's lives forever. Marcus Williams felt the warm California sun on his face as he walked slowly through the shopping center. The yellow roses and white lilies in his left hand smelled beautiful. He checked his phone again. Sarah had texted him 20 minutes ago, saying she was running a little late. That was fine with Marcus. He had nowhere else to be, and the morning was perfect for walking around. He stopped in front of a small bookstore and looked at the display in the window. There was a book about military history that caught his attention. Marcus loved reading about famous battles and military strategies. It helped him understand his own role as a Marine sniper. Knowledge was just as important as physical training in his profession. Marcus pulled out his phone to check the time again. He still had 30 minutes before meeting Sarah. Maybe he could go into the bookstore and look around. But then he remembered the flowers in his hand. The store might be crowded, and he did not want to damage the bouquet before giving it to Sarah's mother. As Marcus put his phone back in his pocket, he noticed a police car parked across the street. This did not worry him. Police cars were common in shopping areas, especially on weekends, when there were more people around. Marcus actually felt safer knowing police were nearby. He had always respected law enforcement. His drill sergeant had taught him that police and military were both servants of the public. Marcus continued walking toward the coffee shop where he planned to wait for Sarah. The same coffee shop where they had shared their first date 8 months ago. He remembered how nervous he had been that day. Sarah was so beautiful and smart. She was studying to become a nurse and wanted to help people. Marcus could not believe she was interested in a rough Marine like him. But Sarah saw past his tough exterior. She saw the man who read poetry in his spare time. She saw the man who called his mother every Sunday without fail. She saw the man who volunteered at the local veterans hospital helping wounded soldiers adjust to civilian life. Sarah made Marcus want to be better than he ever thought possible. Marcus was thinking about Sarah when he heard footsteps behind him. His military training kicked in automatically. In Afghanistan, he had learned to always be aware of his surroundings. The sound of approaching footsteps could mean the difference between life and death. But this was not Afghanistan. This was a peaceful shopping center in California. Marcus turned slightly and saw a police officer walking toward him. The officer's hand was resting on his gun belt. His body language was tense and focused. Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but he remained calm. Years of military discipline had taught him to control his emotions even in stressful situations. Maybe the officer needed directions. Maybe there had been an accident nearby. Maybe someone had reported a suspicious package. Marcus had no reason to think the officer was interested in him personally. He had done nothing wrong. He was just a Marine waiting for his girlfriend on a beautiful Saturday morning. The officer was getting closer now. Marcus could see his face clearly. The man looked tired and stressed. His eyes were focused intently on Marcus like a hunter watching prey. This made Marcus uncomfortable, but he told himself to stay calm. He had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face the approaching officer. His military training told him to show respect and cooperation. He kept his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. The flowers in his left hand suddenly felt heavy. His mouth felt dry, but his voice would be steady when he spoke. The officer stopped 3 feet away from Marcus. His hand was still resting on his weapon. Marcus could see other police cars arriving in the distance. This was becoming a much bigger situation than Marcus had expected. His perfect morning was about to become something very different. Marcus looked into the officer's eyes and saw suspicion and determination. Whatever was happening, it was serious. Marcus took a slow, deep breath and prepared to cooperate fully with whatever the officer needed. He had no idea that his life was about to change forever. The morning sun was still shining brightly, but Marcus suddenly felt very cold. Detective Morrison stepped closer to Marcus with his hand still resting on his weapon. His voice was firm and professional when he spoke, but Marcus could hear the tension underneath the words. "Excuse me, sir. I need to speak with you for a moment." Marcus turned to face the detective completely. He kept his hands visible with the flowers still in his left hand. His military training had taught him that cooperation was the best way to handle any situation with law enforcement. He had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. "Of course, officer. How can I help you today?" Detective Morrison studied Marcus's face, looking for signs of guilt or nervousness. What he saw was a calm young man who seemed genuinely willing to cooperate. But Morrison had been fooled before by criminals who were good actors. The best criminals always appeared innocent on the surface. "We have had some robberies in this area recently. You match the description of someone we are looking for. I need you to put your hands where I can see them and turn around slowly." The words hit Marcus like a physical punch to the stomach. He felt the world spinning around him as he tried to process what was happening. He was a decorated United States Marine. He had served his country with honor in 3 combat tours. He had risked his life to protect American freedoms. And now he was being treated like a common criminal. "Officer, I think there has been some kind of mistake. I am a United States Marine. I am just waiting here for my girlfriend. My identification is in my wallet if you would like to see it." But Detective Morrison was no longer listening to Marcus's words. He had already decided that Marcus was his suspect. Everything Marcus said was being filtered through that assumption. The detective saw Marcus's calm demeanor as suspicious rather than cooperative. He saw Marcus's military bearing as threatening rather than respectful. "Turn around now and put your hands behind your back." Marcus felt his heart breaking as he slowly turned around. The flowers fell from his hand and scattered on the concrete sidewalk. The beautiful yellow roses and white lilies that he had bought for Sarah's mother were crushed under Detective Morrison's boots as he moved to handcuff Marcus. The cold metal handcuffs clicked shut around Marcus's wrists with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire shopping center. People stopped walking and turned to stare at the scene. Children pointed while their parents pulled them closer. Teenagers pulled out their phones to record videos. Everyone was watching as a decorated war veteran was being arrested like a dangerous criminal. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to stay calm. This was all a terrible misunderstanding that would be cleared up soon. Once they checked his identification and called his commanding officer, everything would be fine. He just needed to stay calm and cooperate until the truth came out. "This is a mistake, officer. I am Sergeant Marcus Williams, United States Marine Corps. I have references. I have a commanding officer you can call. Please just check my identification." But Detective Morrison was not interested in hearing Marcus's explanations. He was convinced he had caught the robbery suspect. He was already thinking about the praise he would receive from his captain. Maybe this arrest would finally get him the promotion he had been waiting for. Marcus was pushed toward the police car with his hands cuffed behind his back. His white dress shirt was getting wrinkled and dirty. The shirt his mother had bought him for important occasions was being ruined as he was pressed against the hot metal of the police car. Other shoppers were taking pictures and videos with their phones. Marcus felt humiliated and angry, but he kept his emotions under control. His drill sergeant had always said that a Marine's character was revealed in crisis, not created by it. Marcus would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing him break down. Just as Detective Morrison was opening the back door of the police car, Marcus heard a familiar voice screaming his name. He turned his head and saw Sarah running toward them. Her face was filled with horror and disbelief. She was holding her phone and already recording everything that was happening. "That is my boyfriend. He is a United States Marine. You have arrested the wrong person." Sarah tried to get closer to Marcus, but other police officers held her back. She was crying and shouting, but her words fell on deaf ears. The officers had already made their decision about Marcus's guilt. The holding cell was small and cold with concrete walls that seemed to close in around Marcus. He sat on the narrow metal bench, still wearing his wrinkled white dress shirt. The shirt that was supposed to make a good impression on Sarah's parents was now stained and torn. Everything about his perfect day had been destroyed in a matter of minutes. Marcus stared at the gray walls and tried to make sense of what had happened. One moment he was a free man waiting for his girlfriend. The next moment, he was behind bars, accused of crimes he had never committed. The injustice of it all made his chest tight with anger, but he forced himself to stay calm. The other prisoners in nearby cells were loud and hostile. Some of them were clearly drunk from the night before. Others were shouting at the guards and making threats. The smell of unwashed bodies and desperation filled the air. This was not a place where an innocent man should be spending his Saturday afternoon. Marcus had been fingerprinted and photographed like any common criminal. The police officers had treated him with disrespect and suspicion, despite his repeated attempts to explain who he was. When he asked to make a phone call, they told him he would have to wait. When he asked to speak to his supervisor, they ignored him completely. Hours passed with no word from anyone. Marcus did not know if Sarah had been able to contact his commanding officer. He did not know if anyone was working to get him out of this nightmare. All he could do was sit and wait and try to maintain his dignity in an impossible situation. Meanwhile, Sarah was in the police station lobby making frantic phone calls. She had called Camp Pendleton and spoken to the duty officer. She had called Marcus's commanding officer, Captain Rodriguez. She had called everyone she could think of who might be able to help clear up this terrible mistake. Captain Rodriguez was shocked when Sarah explained what had happened. Sergeant Marcus Williams was one of the most decorated Marines in his unit. Marcus had earned multiple commendations for valor under fire. He had saved American lives during his 3 combat tours. The idea that Marcus would commit armed robbery was absolutely ridiculous. The captain immediately began making phone calls of his own. He called the police station and demanded to speak to whoever was in charge of Marcus's case. He called his superior officers to report what had happened. Within an hour, the news of Marcus's arrest was spreading through the military chain of command like wildfire. Colonel Stevens received Captain Rodriguez's call while he was having lunch with his family. When he heard about Marcus's situation, he felt his blood pressure rising. This was not just about one Marine being wrongfully arrested. This was about the military's relationship with civilian law enforcement. This was about respect and justice, and doing what was right. The colonel cut his family lunch short and drove immediately to his office. He pulled Marcus's complete service record and reviewed every detail. What he found made him even more angry. Marcus was not just a good Marine. He was an exceptional Marine who had gone above and beyond the call of duty repeatedly. Colonel Stevens picked up his phone and called General Patterson's office. This situation had gone beyond what a colonel could handle alone. This required action from the highest levels of military command. General Patterson was a 4-star general who commanded respect from everyone who met him. If anyone could fix this injustice, it would be the general. General Patterson was in a meeting when his aide interrupted with news of Marcus's arrest. The general listened to the report with growing disbelief and anger. He had read Marcus's file before. Marcus was exactly the kind of Marine that made the general proud to serve. The idea that such a man was sitting in a civilian jail cell was unacceptable. The general dismissed his meeting and called for his dress uniform. He was going to handle this situation personally. Too many good Marines had been disrespected by civilians who did not understand what military service meant. This was going to stop today. Back in his cell, Marcus heard guards talking about his case. Apparently, there was some kind of commotion happening upstairs. Military officers were arriving at the police station. Phone calls were being made to important people. Marcus allowed himself to hope that help was finally coming. Marcus thought about his mother back in Detroit. She had always been so proud of his military service. She bragged to her neighbors about her son, the Marine hero. What would she think when she found out he had been arrested like a criminal? The shame of it was almost worse than the injustice. But Marcus refused to give up hope. He knew that his fellow Marines would not abandon him. The military took care of its own. Somewhere out there, people were fighting for his freedom. He just had to be patient and trust that the truth would eventually come out. General Patterson sat behind his large oak desk reading Marcus Williams's service file for the 3rd time. The office was quiet except for the steady tick of an antique clock that had belonged to his father. The general had seen many files during his 30-year military career, but Marcus's record was truly exceptional. 3 combat tours in Afghanistan, expert marksman qualification, distinguished service medal, bronze star with valor, Purple Heart. The list of commendations went on for 2 full pages. Marcus had once held a defensive position for 18 hours straight under heavy enemy fire to protect a convoy of wounded American soldiers. He had saved lives at the risk of his own. And now this hero was sitting in a civilian jail cell accused of armed robbery. General Patterson felt his anger growing with each page he read. This was not just about one Marine. This was about respect for the military and for the men and women who put their lives on the line for their country. The civilian police had treated Marcus like a criminal without bothering to check his background or verify his story. The general's aide knocked softly on the door and entered the office. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was a sharp young officer who handled the general's most sensitive cases. She had been making phone calls for the past hour gathering information about Marcus's arrest. "Sir, I have been in contact with the police department. They are refusing to release Sergeant Williams despite clear evidence of his innocence. The detective who made the arrest is insisting that military service does not make someone immune from criminal charges." General Patterson stood up from his desk. His face was stone cold with controlled fury. In 30 years of military service, he had learned when to be diplomatic and when to use the full weight of his authority. This was definitely a time for authority. "Colonel Hayes, prepare my dress uniform. Cancel all my appointments for the rest of the day. We are going to court." Colonel Hayes had worked for General Patterson for 3 years. She had never seen him this angry. When the general spoke in that tone, people listened and obeyed without question. She knew that someone was about to learn a very hard lesson about respecting United States Marines. While General Patterson was getting dressed, Colonel Hayes was making more phone calls. She contacted the district attorney's office and learned that charges had already been filed against Marcus. A court hearing was scheduled for that afternoon. The case was moving quickly through the system despite the lack of evidence. Colonel Hayes also discovered something that made her stomach turn. Marcus had a solid alibi for 2 of the 3 robberies he was accused of committing. On those dates, he had been on base conducting training exercises in front of dozens of witnesses. The police had not bothered to check his whereabouts before arresting him. When General Patterson emerged from his private bathroom, he was wearing his full dress uniform with all his ribbons and decorations. The sight was impressive and intimidating. 4 stars gleamed on his shoulders. Combat ribbons covered his chest. This was a man who commanded respect wherever he went. "Colonel, what else have you learned about this situation?" Colonel Hayes handed the general a folder with all the information she had gathered. "Sir, Sergeant Williams has a perfect alibi for most of these robberies. He was on base in uniform in front of multiple witnesses. The police arrested him based purely on racial profiling. There is no physical evidence linking him to any crime." General Patterson reviewed the folder quickly. His jaw tightened as he read the details. This was even worse than he had thought. Marcus was not just innocent. He was obviously innocent to anyone who bothered to do basic police work. The fact that he was still in jail was a disgrace to the entire justice system. The general picked up his phone and called his driver. "Sergeant, prepare my car immediately. We are going to the courthouse. And Sergeant, make sure you are wearing your dress uniform as well." General Patterson had attended many court proceedings during his career. Usually he was there to support Marines who had gotten into minor trouble. Sometimes he testified as a character witness, but he had never gone to court to confront civilian authorities who had wrongfully arrested one of his Marines. As the general walked toward his car, he thought about Marcus sitting in that jail cell. A young man who had given everything for his country was being treated like a common criminal. This was not the America that Marcus had fought to defend. This was not the justice system that deserved the sacrifice of American soldiers. General Patterson got into his car and told his driver to head for the courthouse. It was time for the civilian authorities to learn what happened when they disrespected a United States Marine. The general had the power and authority to make this right, and he intended to use every bit of it. The drive to the courthouse took 20 minutes. During that time, General Patterson reviewed his strategy. He would be firm but professional. He would use facts and evidence rather than emotion. He would make it clear that the military stood behind Marcus 100%. By the end of the day, Marcus would be free, and the people responsible for this injustice would understand their mistake. The courtroom was packed with more people than Judge Morrison had seen in 20 years on the bench. Word had spread quickly about the Marine who had been wrongfully arrested. Local news reporters filled the front rows with their cameras and notebooks ready. Military personnel in dress uniforms sat together in a show of support. Curious citizens filled every remaining seat. Marcus sat at the defendant's table wearing his Marine dress blue uniform. Captain Jennifer Hayes, his military lawyer, had insisted he wear it to show exactly who the police had arrested. The uniform was immaculate with every ribbon and decoration perfectly placed. Marcus looked like what he was, an American hero who had served his country with distinction. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh was having serious doubts about proceeding with the case. The evidence was practically non-existent. The public opinion was turning strongly against the police department. The media attention was making everyone nervous. But she had already filed charges, and backing down now would look like giving in to pressure. Captain Hayes stood up to address the court. She was a sharp lawyer who specialized in military justice cases. She had reviewed Marcus's file and the police reports. What she found was shocking in its lack of substance. The entire case was built on nothing more than racial profiling and assumptions. Your Honor, what we have here is not a criminal case, but a complete failure of justice. Sergeant Williams was arrested for the crime of being a young black man in a public place. The evidence will show that he could not have committed these robberies because he was serving his country at the time they occurred. Judge Morrison had been reviewing the case files all morning. He was troubled by what he saw. The police had arrested Marcus based on a vague physical description that could have fit thousands of people. There was no physical evidence, no witness identification, no probable cause beyond the color of Marcus's skin. District Attorney Walsh stood up to present the state's case. She knew it was weak, but she was committed to proceeding. Your Honor, regardless of Sergeant Williams's military service, he still matches the description provided by robbery witnesses. We believe he should be held until we can conduct a thorough investigation. Captain Hayes was preparing to respond when a commotion started at the back of the courtroom. The bailiff was trying to manage a crowd of people who were trying to enter. Someone very important had apparently arrived and was requesting permission to address the court. Judge Morrison called for order as the noise level in the courtroom continued to rise. He could see people in the back turning around and whispering excitedly. Flash cameras were going off as reporters tried to capture whatever was happening. Your Honor, came a powerful voice from the rear of the courtroom. I request permission to address this court on behalf of Sergeant Williams. The entire courtroom fell silent as General Patterson began walking down the center aisle. His dress uniform was magnificent with 4 stars shining on his shoulders and rows of combat ribbons across his chest. Behind him walked Colonel Stevens and 3 other high-ranking officers. Their footsteps echoed in the sudden quiet. Judge Morrison had never had a 4-star general appear in his courtroom. The presence of such high-ranking military officers was both impressive and intimidating. The judge could feel the weight of authority that General Patterson carried with him. General, this is highly unusual procedure. I am not sure how to handle this situation. General Patterson stopped in front of the judge's bench and stood at attention. His voice carried the authority of someone who was accustomed to being obeyed without question. Your Honor, I am General David Patterson, commanding officer of Camp Pendleton. The young man sitting at that table is one of my Marines, and I am here to speak on his behalf. District Attorney Walsh could feel her case falling apart. The military presence was overwhelming. The media attention was intense. The complete lack of evidence against Marcus was becoming more obvious by the minute, but she decided to press forward anyway. Your Honor, regardless of Sergeant Williams's military record, he still needs to answer for these serious charges. The law applies to everyone equally, including members of the military. General Patterson turned to face the district attorney. His expression was cold, and his voice was steady, but everyone in the courtroom could feel the power behind his words. Counselor, I have reviewed the evidence in this case. What evidence there is amounts to nothing more than racial profiling and assumptions. This Marine has served his country with honor and distinction. He deserves better treatment than this." The courtroom was electric with tension. Reporters were scribbling notes frantically. The military officers were standing at attention behind their general. Marcus felt tears of gratitude in his eyes as he watched his commanding officers fight for his freedom. Judge Morrison knew that this case was about to become much bigger than a simple robbery charge. With the military involved and the media watching every decision he made would be scrutinized closely. He needed to handle this situation very carefully. General Patterson stood in the center of the courtroom like a force of nature. His presence commanded respect and attention from everyone in the room. The 4 stars on his shoulders caught the light and seemed to shine brighter than the courtroom fixtures. This was a man who had spent 30 years earning the right to speak with absolute authority. Judge Morrison had been on the bench for over 2 decades, but he had never experienced anything like this. The general's arrival had transformed a routine criminal hearing into something much more significant. The judge could feel the weight of history in the room. This moment would be remembered and talked about for years to come. "General Patterson, you have permission to address the court, but I must remind you that this is a civilian legal proceeding with established procedures." The general nodded respectfully to the judge, but his voice remained firm and unwavering. "Your Honor, I understand the procedures of this court, but I also understand justice, and what has happened to Sergeant Williams is not justice. It is a travesty that demands immediate correction." District Attorney Walsh was feeling the pressure from all sides. The case against Marcus was weak, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. The military involvement had raised the stakes beyond anything she had expected, but her pride would not let her back down without a fight. "General Patterson, I respect your position and your service to our country, but military rank does not override civilian law. Sergeant Williams must face these charges like any other citizen." General Patterson turned his full attention to the district attorney. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with power that made everyone in the courtroom lean forward to listen. "Ms. Walsh, I have brought evidence that will end this proceeding immediately. Evidence that your office should have discovered before filing these ridiculous charges." The general reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. He handed it to Captain Hayes, who stood up to present it to the court. "Your Honor, this folder contains Sergeant Williams's duty rosters and base security records for the dates in question. Records that prove he was on military base during 2 of the 3 robberies he is accused of committing." Judge Morrison accepted the folder and began reading through the documents. His expression changed as he realized what he was seeing. Time-stamped security footage showing Marcus entering and leaving the base. Duty rosters signed by multiple officers. Training exercise reports with Marcus's name and signature. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. "Ms. Walsh, did your office attempt to verify Sergeant Williams's whereabouts during these alleged crimes?" District Attorney Walsh felt her face burning with embarrassment. The answer was no, and everyone in the courtroom was about to find out. "Your Honor, we were proceeding based on witness descriptions and other evidence." General Patterson stepped forward again. His voice was no longer quiet. It filled the courtroom with the authority of command. "Your Honor, there was no other evidence. Sergeant Williams was arrested for the crime of being a young black man in public. He was handcuffed and humiliated based on nothing more than his appearance and the assumptions of police officers who could not be bothered to do basic investigation." The courtroom erupted in murmurs and whispers. Reporters were typing frantically on their phones and laptops. The military officers behind General Patterson stood even straighter with pride in their commanding officer's words. Marcus felt overwhelming gratitude and emotion as he watched General Patterson fight for him. This 4-star general had taken time from his important duties to come to court for one sergeant. This was what military brotherhood meant. This was why Marcus was proud to be a Marine. Judge Morrison finished reading through the evidence folder. What he saw made him angry at the sloppy police work that had led to this situation. Marcus had perfect alibis for most of the crimes he was accused of. The arrest had been based on nothing but prejudice and poor judgment. "Ms. Walsh, in light of this evidence, do you wish to proceed with these charges?" District Attorney Walsh knew the case was over. Continuing would only make the situation worse for everyone involved. She had no choice but to admit defeat. Your Honor, in light of the new evidence, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Sergeant Williams. General Patterson was not satisfied with just having the charges dropped. He had something more to say, and the entire courtroom was going to hear it. This was about more than just Marcus. This was about respect and justice, and doing what was right. Your Honor, I have one more thing to say before this proceeding ends. Sergeant Williams is not just any Marine. He is a hero who has served 3 combat tours in Afghanistan. He has saved American lives under enemy fire. He has earned medals for valor and sacrifice. And he was treated like a criminal because of the color of his skin. The general turned to face Marcus, who stood up at attention. What happened next would be captured by every camera in the courtroom and broadcast around the world. What happened next in that packed courtroom would be replayed on news channels across America for weeks to come. General Patterson walked slowly toward Marcus, who stood at perfect military attention. The 4-star general stopped directly in front of the young sergeant and did something that shocked everyone watching. General Patterson extended his hand for a formal military handshake. But this was more than just a handshake between officers. This was a public statement that would resonate far beyond the walls of this courtroom. This was a moment of justice and respect that had been too long in coming. Sergeant Williams, on behalf of the United States military and every American citizen whose freedom you have defended, I apologize. What happened to you was wrong. It was unjust, and it will not stand. Marcus felt tears running down his face as he shook his commanding general's hand. After hours of humiliation and injustice, he was finally being treated with the respect he deserved. The nightmare was over, but the healing was just beginning. General Patterson was not finished. He turned to face the packed courtroom and delivered a speech that would be quoted and remembered for generations. His voice carried to every corner of the room, and his words carried the weight of absolute moral authority. This Marine has served 3 combat tours in Afghanistan. He has saved American lives under enemy fire. He has upheld his oath to defend this nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And he was arrested for the crime of being a black man in America. This is not the country we fight to protect. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing to listen to every word. This was history being made in real time. This was a moment when power spoke truth and justice prevailed over prejudice. Judge Morrison dismissed all charges against Marcus immediately. His voice was solemn as he addressed the court. Sergeant Williams, you are free to go with the sincere apologies of this court. What happened to you should never happen to any American citizen. District Attorney Walsh quietly announced that her office would be reviewing all procedures for filing charges in the future. Detective Morrison, who was watching from the back of the courtroom, knew that his career would never recover from this public humiliation. His poor judgment had been exposed in front of the entire community. As Marcus and General Patterson left the courthouse together, they were surrounded by reporters and cameras. The general's final statement to the media was simple but powerful. This is what a hero looks like. Remember his name. Sergeant Marcus Williams, United States Marine. The story of Marcus's wrongful arrest and General Patterson's dramatic intervention became national news within hours. Social media exploded with support for Marcus and praise for General Patterson's leadership. The video of the general's apology was viewed millions of times around the world. Sarah was waiting outside the courthouse with tears of joy in her eyes. She ran to Marcus and threw her arms around him. I knew they would come for you. I knew your Marine family would not abandon you. Marcus held Sarah close and felt the weight of the day finally lifting from his shoulders. The nightmare was over, but the lessons learned would last forever. He had experienced injustice, but he had also experienced the power of brotherhood and loyalty. 6 months later, Marcus was promoted to staff sergeant and accepted into elite special operations training. His wrongful arrest had not damaged his military career. Instead, it had shown his character under pressure and earned him even more respect from his fellow Marines. General Patterson attended Marcus and Sarah's wedding the following year. In his toast to the happy couple, he said that Marcus represented the very best of America's fighting forces, a man of courage, integrity, and grace under pressure. The case led to significant reforms in police procedures and training. New guidelines required officers to verify basic facts before making arrests. Sensitivity training became mandatory for all law enforcement personnel. The community demanded better, and their leaders responded. Detective Morrison was reassigned to desk duty and eventually left the police force. He never publicly apologized to Marcus, but friends said he deeply regretted his actions that day. The case became a cautionary tale taught in police academies across the country. Marcus and Sarah eventually moved to a house near the base where they started a family. Marcus continued his military service with distinction, while Sarah became a nurse at the local veterans hospital. They both dedicated their lives to serving others and making their community better. The flowers that Marcus had bought that Saturday morning were long gone, but the seeds of change and justice that grew from that terrible day bloomed into something beautiful, a reminder that courage and truth will always triumph over prejudice and fear when good people refuse to stay silent.